we can. Thanks to everybody for coming, turning up so promptly. I have some notes here from Carlin which I observe scrupulously. He says we might usefully have a moment's silence to mark the passing of the Queen, which I agree. We will now have a moment's silence, please. That's a moment. Thank you. The housekeeping stuff. Teas and coffees are in the corner. There's a water cooler in the reception lobby. The toilets are upstairs. The security arrangements are that we, all of us, cannot go anywhere outside the lobby area without an officer. And in the event of a fire, guests should just leave the building by the side door in the committee room. Which is that one? Is that one over there? Where's that take us? Oh, that's not down. All right. Okay. Then we have to disperse and return after 15 to 20 minutes. Has that ever happened?
The alarm has gone off.
Thank you. The meeting is being live cast and recorded for uploading later. Next, before we actually start the agenda again, we'll go around the room, please, and everybody say who they are and where they're from, and anything else they want us to know about them. If there's special interest, that would be helpful. What's your name, Jeff?
I'm Councillor Jeff Winnard. I'm a Deputy Chair of this particular Scrutiny Committee. I'm a Bradford Councillor and a member for the Bingley Ward.
Just a quick note, members, before we go any further, while we're doing this, on the microphone, if you're on the left, press the left. If you're on the right, press the right, and it'll come up with your name and everything. If you just ensure you turn it on when you want to speak and turn it off when you're finished. Thank you.
Get this right. Thank you. Thank you.
Am I supposed to be introducing myself?
Yes, please. Who you
Yeah.
are, where you're from, and any special interest that you
I'm
have.
Councillor Brenda Monteith. I represent the Brighouse Ward in Calderdale. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Elizabeth Rhodes, known as Betty. Elizabeth is my Sunday name. I represent North Ward in Wakefield, the city centre. I'm chair of the local adult social care health committee.
Hi, I'm Faye Barker. I'm Head of Commercial at the Combined Authority.
Morning all, Lorna Jones, Corporate Planning and Performance Manager at the Combined Authority.
Good morning, Angela Taylor, Director Corporate Commercial Services for the Combined Authority.
Good morning, Councillor Sulia Richards, representing the Newsom Ward in Kirklees, and very interested in climate change and getting to net zero, etc. Thank you.
Paul Davis, I represent Home Valley South in Kirklees. A cabinet member for corporate within Kirklees as well.
Moses Mo, I'm from Kirklees as well, and also from Home Valley South Ward.
Jane Dowson, Chapel Allerton Ward in Leeds, which covers Chapel Allerton, Chapel Town and Meanwood, and representing the residents of Leeds.
Sorry, again?
All the residents of Leeds, not just in my ward.
Councillor Paul Ray, Hunter Riverside Ward and Leeds City Council, and I'm the Corporate Governance and Audit Chair for Leeds City Council as well.
Councillor Fiona Fitzpatrick, City of York Council.
Councillor Samantha Harvey, the last and the least. This is only my second term for Wakefield Rural. I'm a Conservative Councillor. Thank you.
Councillor Alan Griffiths, Idle and Factory Ward on the Bradford Metropolitan District Council.
Councillor Carol Thurkill from Bradford Council, representing Clayton and Fairweather Green Ward.
Mike Barnes from Calderdale. Rarely need a microphone, but I'll use it today. Representing Skirkle Ward in Calderdale.
And Hannah Scale, Scrutiny Support Officer, Clerk in this committee. Thank you.
Peter Harron, Member of Leeds City Council for Oldley Ward, and I'm interested in the whole subject of corporate governance and audit, which is very sad. We're now to the agenda proper. Apologies and for absence, we'll just stress again, we don't have a problem with quora today, but we have had in the past, we've had to write meetings off and make no decisions because we didn't have enough people. So not a problem today, but if there is a reason why anybody can't come, please let Hannah know well in advance so we can always try and get a substitute. But it is frustrating if only 10 of us turn up and we, in a sense, are wasting our time. It's a legal quorum, we can't do anything about it, but Hannah will sort us out. The same applies if you're leaving early, because we've had that as well in the past, where you're just about quorum and somebody leaves, then you can't make any more decisions. And does everybody understand the arrangements of substitutes if you can't come? Just in case. Explain, Hannah, please.
It's in the standing orders if you want it word for word, but really it's if a councillor that's on your party and is from your local council but sits on another committee, so let's say they're on transport, they can cover for you. If that isn't the case, if you're a smaller party, you can nominate somebody as long as we know, and we can have that all in place. But as I say, it's in the standing orders and I'd be happy to circulate that afterwards if that's helpful.
And we have one apology for absence this morning, do we?
We do. It's Councillor Jones, Chair.
Yeah, and again, before we get too serious, if people can't hear us or see us, if you want to go sit in the seats at the end so you can get a better view, or if people want a better view, please do so. Don't feel you're out of sight. Number 2, declarations of disclosable pecuniary interests. Nope. 3, exclusion of the press and public. I think not. Nothing there. No. Corporate Scrutiny Committee Governance Arrangements. Angela, you're going to lead on this, or have you got somebody with you, or is Hannah going to do it?
Yeah, I can do it.
Hannah, do it. Thank you. Right.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So this report is just for you to note. It's to note the scrutiny governance arrangements for overview and scrutiny, the general function, and the terms of reference, scrutiny standing orders, quorum, substitute rules, and the meeting dates, which are at the end. Just for information, I'm sure most of you are aware, but we had a bit of a change with transport and economy. So we had transport take up the place work. So they're now transport and infrastructure, but of course that doesn't directly affect this committee. We've talked about quorum. I think that's really it, but if there's any questions, be happy to answer any. Thank you.
So just briefly, and I know we discussed this at the last meeting, because people come so far, then when we're not having a decision-making meeting, it would be possible to have hybrid. So it might be worth considering that option should we ever have non-decision-making meetings.
As I understand it, hybrid meetings can't make binding decisions, can they? It's just
Decisions have to be made in person.
yes,
but also, I know on the council, I don't know if it's the same across then if you don't attend in person, you don't get your mark for attending at all. So that might put some people off using hybrid, but it would mean that potentially more people would attend if they had other commitments like hospital appointments that were close and so on.
Another authority at which I'm a member fines members £50 if they don't give their apologies in advance or have a good reason for not being there. And they do as well. It's not just a theory, they do. No questions on governance arrangements? Thank you. Page 5, item 5 is the minutes from last year. Last meeting. They're on page 19. Shall we take them page by page if anyone's to raise? Page 19. Page 20.
Chair. Did we ever get the closure report on the accommodation project?
I don't think we did. Are we going to get that?
There's a two-part closure report on the accommodation project. Apologies, I understood you wanted to discuss it in a meeting, so I was bringing it to the next meeting when it was scheduled. But I can share what we have. We've done the initial project completion, but there is then a longer-term benefits report because we need time for the benefits to bed in. But happy, whatever the committee wishes, I can circulate something or it can go on the agenda or both.
Both, I think, yes. I think we need to formally discuss that. It's quite a substantial exercise. Thank you. Further down page 20, there's a reference to Welcome to Yorkshire. Can somebody continue, again confirm that we are not involved in that, no financial or resource commitment to that, have we? Well, yes, actually.
Nothing's changed since we reported it to you last time.
So it's costing us nothing, and we're not officers spending time or anything like that.
We're not involved in the final part of Welcome to Yorkshire.
Thank you. Anything on page 20, page 21? Page 22. Now the second paragraph on page 22 is what we're going to come to later, I think, isn't it? Back to inflation on budgets. We have that later, haven't we? We have somebody to speak to us on that.
Chair, may I?
Yes, please, Betty. Yeah.
A valuable part of the report here today, sure, that's better, will there be a further discussion on the issue about the workforce agenda? Because that's a big issue across every authority, and I'm sure the combined authority is no different. And how is workforce planning going to be structured? Are we going to see a paper on it in terms of the needs now and what the plans are for the vision of the recruitment and retention for the future?
Again, thank you. I understood that was going to be a focus of a future meeting also. I can do a brief update if you want as part of this
just whispered
meeting.
that to me, but yes, a brief update would be appropriate. Yes, please.
Chair, may I just say, I appreciate that, but if we've items on the agenda, I don't want them to get lost in future meetings because, apologies, I couldn't make the last one. And one of the next meetings on the agenda, being as we've only 4 in a year, is actually the Mayor's meeting. So I think we ought to be prioritising what's going to be coming in terms of the next meeting, the next meeting, the next meeting. Because theoretically, in terms of the decision or recommendations from here, we only have 2 meetings to see to prioritising of these. And so far, Angela has identified 2 issues that need to come back, and they are 2 major issues. And how are we going to identify them on an agenda for the next meeting that they're not going to get lost?
Before Angela starts, if Carl Edward be saying this is where we need working groups, and groups of 4 or 5 of us to take one of these subjects in a separate meeting outside the main committee quarterly meetings, which I think is probably quite a sound way forward. We'll think about that. And anyway, Angela, tell us what we need to know about.
I'm sure it could take up a lot of meeting time, and happy if you do wish to put together another meeting, a task and finish group or something around this. But in the interim, just to acknowledge that yes, we are having similar challenges as local authority partners in terms of recruitment and retention. We have made a lot of appointments to the organisation, but we are actually an organisation that has been growing. Part of the funding that has come as part of the mayoral devolution agreement has been more money, and more money needs more resource. Some of that resource is being spent at partners, and they're also having to recruit to be able to deliver on that. So I think it's an acknowledged problem across the public and private sector, but probably more so across the public sector. The heads of HR across the 5 authorities and ourselves are meeting to discuss what can be done about it, and we are looking very much at what our current people strategy is. There's been a piece of work around the senior structure of the organisation, which the Combined Authority agreed back in June, which was a move to enable the directors to be focused on outcomes and ensure that the corporate centre was then set up to support them. Part of the next phase of that is looking at whether our people strategy is fit for purpose in the current world. To a combination of what people now expect from work. I think we touched on some of this at the last meeting, that 3 years ago the working from home was an outlier. Now it's very much a core part of an offer. So how do we need to adapt? How can we make sure we're making the most of growing our own talent? How do we make sure we address the gender and diversity gaps we've got? So it is a huge area that we are making small inroads into, but we are intending to bring forward a new people strategy that tries to ensure we can deploy our resource as tactically as possible, because one of the challenges we have is new things coming along. Government announcements this morning that suddenly mean we need to move quickly to mobilise behind something, and how can we ensure that we're in a world where we can easily move people from one task to another, and within that is work around more generic role profiles, ways of workforce planning that enable that better forward planning alongside business planning that Lorna will touch on later. That if this is our business plan, this is our resource, how do we match the two up better? And we're now becoming of a size and a shape of an organisation, we need to be able to do that in a more agile, more flexible way. So work underway, a lot more to come, and certainly happy to engage with this committee in the way you best find fit. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Could I suppose, really emphasise what Councillor Rhodes has said? Clearly, staffing, recruitment, workforce issues are arguably, after budgets, the key area of this committee is in, or should be interested. And indeed, on page 63 in the draft scrutiny programme, the staffing issue is number 2 after inflation and budgets. And I think it's a good point that the Mayor's meeting's next on the 18th of November, where ordinarily we would have perhaps returned to this issue. What I'm particularly, and I note what Angela said, but what I'm particularly interested in is the operational impact that shortages of particular specialist staff, be they finance staff, IT staff, people who know about cyber security, or analytical staff, who are actually key to some of the work which the authority will have to deliver, what the plan is, what the contingency short term. I know there's things you can do in the longer term, but what's the contingency now, and how are some of these issues manifesting themselves, or as risks to how the organisation can deliver what it needs to do?
So again, I'll try and keep this brief because it's a very large question. I think we're finding gaps across most parts of the organisation. I'll find some stats and share them afterwards. We have been successfully recruiting to quite a number of vacancies over the year. We are then finding stubborn vacancies that we advertise, we don't get much response. We advertise again, we don't get much response. So in those instances, we're trying to advertise more widely, we're trying to find different means to draw attention to ourselves, we're trying to get more involved in careers fairs, make our voice known a bit more. I think the West Yorkshire Combined Authority probably it's not a childhood aspiration, I must go and work for the Combined Authority. And I think we're trying to change that, because maybe it should be. There's some huge opportunities here. So we are looking at things like market rate supplements where there are known gaps. And we're trying to do very much on an individual vacancy by vacancy basis, because some are being filled. The reality is, as for all organisations, once you don't have your full complement of staff, then people are more stretched, and decisions have to be made about what's prioritised and what maybe is going to take a bit longer to deliver. And they are real continuing discussions every day, every week, in terms of where should people focus their efforts, because the last thing we want is people feeling stressed that they have their work programme and they want to deliver it, but they just can't because they haven't got the full resource required. We have been doing an in-year refresh of the business plan, which Lorna's team have been leading,
to look, and we've not really done that in depth in the same way, but this year has necessitated it because there's been so much new stuff coming forward, along with the resourcing gaps. We've then had to think, okay, what does give? What do we keep doing? What do we have to stop? What do we have to reschedule? And that the real operational impact is everything will take a little bit longer to be done, but we're trying to make sure the key things don't. We have to hit the dates for budgets. We have to hit dates for certain schemes. So we're trying to prioritise as best we can.
You want to come back, Jeff?
Just very. Thanks for that. I suppose one of the things in the recruitment side of things is, to what extent are the authority able to look into people who perhaps wouldn't ordinarily think about working in local authorities, because to some extent the market for staff in local authorities, people tend to move around between authorities, and I wonder, because the combined authority is a different sort of beast. It needs to perhaps, and I'm sure you might be already doing this, try to reach out to people who ordinarily wouldn't think about a career in either the public sector or local authorities particularly.
We don't often advertise the jobs as being local government or public sector. I think it probably comes through in some of the package that is on offer and the benefits of working here. But we certainly don't limit ourselves to expecting people to have that background. And we've got a recruitment advisor who is focused on trying to extend our reach at getting out to careers fairs. And if you turn it into the sort of work we do, rather than we're the main authority, there's work for people who are experts in digital, there's work for people who are delivering projects. The fact it's a local government body gives, I think, hopefully a framework of benefits that are attractive and a path of support that makes them appealing. We are looking at how we use apprenticeships and bring people in younger, how we can grow our own, but we know we need to do a lot more in this space.
On that, because this, I think, is the most important topic on the agenda this morning, because if you haven't got the Indians, then the chiefs are nowhere. Sorry, that's the explanation of how things work in reality. And I noted originally when you mentioned things were being looked at by directors or whoever at the top, I think sometimes the chain from the top needs looking upward, right? First of all, where are these posts advertised? I have never ever seen any post advertised under the heading of the Combined Authority. I think the name itself needs some understanding when somebody sees Combined Authority. What does that mean? The description of what the Combined Authority is and what it's got to offer. How is it advertised, Angela? I mean, I know people in Wakefield, for instance, who have experience in terms of programming and everything else like this, who've been in another organisation and through that organisation having a review, is out there looking in the market. I couldn't say to that person, well, have you looked on the Combined Authority list to see if there's any vacancies over there? How are you advertising? How are you presenting them to the public? And I think the explanation of Combined Authority doesn't mean a lot to people out there. If you say it's Wakefield Council, Leeds Council or whatever, then that's a better understanding of the process of who they'd be working for. But I have to say, in the years I've sat here, I have never ever seen anything advertised in terms of local authorities out there putting it out in their on their website or whatever. I've never ever seen anything about it. And is it not possible that we're being too highbrow, forgive me saying it, being too highbrow in the advertisement instead of an understanding of people what the opportunities might be?
Not sure it's entirely fair that you answer the whole question, but you get the thrust of it, don't you?
I can, and I can start to answer it, and there is a lot more information on this, but because it wasn't a substantive item on the agenda, I don't have it all at my fingertips. But we advertise, as a starting point, all our posts go on our website. We share with partners, and we advertise partner jobs on our websites, and they do that reciprocally, is my understanding. We advertise via LinkedIn. We use a website called Virchida, which is also aimed at trying to get diversity and gender balance into roles. So we use them. We use a variety of sources depending on the roles. So we'll often go to the sort of relevant trade journal. So if it's a finance job, we'll go to the accountancy press for that. Similarly for legal, they'll go to the places where lawyers will look for jobs. We've got a lot more information on where we advertise, how we try and attract, which I think we need to find a way to share that with you. Yeah, we do have that.
Can I just ask, are you working in partnership with any of the colleges or universities to get the homegrown staff that we need?
It's one of the areas we're trying to build on. It's still in early days. I do think we need, Chair, to find a way to bring this to a substantive meeting so I can actually, there is a lot more information I could bring that so I don't have, I have some of it here but not all of it.
There's clearly a lot of deep concern and interest in this. So we'll come back to this at the end of the meeting, at which I will propose that we have a subgroup which meets in 4 or 5 weeks' time, and we'll try and prescribe a brief of what we want to talk about. Of as many people as want to join it, to be honest, but not to wait till the next meeting and have a one subject working group, or whatever we call it. Now, let people think about that, and at the end of the meeting we'll see if people are still interested in that, and if so, we'll get half a dozen volunteers, I trust, and then we'll come back to them. But thank you, Betty. It's the centre of what we're doing. Any other questions on? No, go through the agenda. No, go through the minutes. Recruitment retention, yes, we do that one. I know, on page 24, we're not having a long discussion about this, but apparently simulated phishing emails were sent out to test awareness. Is that moral? Well, we should be doing that. You see, page 24, 6 or 7 lines down from the bottom. One of our methods of trying to prevent hacking is that's not all, is it? Can we do that? Does anybody else think that's justified? Because I don't. And is it worth doing? Do you find anything?
It's something we intend to do. We're not going to announce when we do it, but we do find quite a lot of staff are concerned, and we do get quite a lot of reporting when people are concerned about emails and sometimes they're not sure. And the purpose of it is actually hopefully to make people feel more comfortable that these things happen and help people feel comfortable at acknowledging them and reporting them through. I mean, our firewalls and other defences catch some of them, but there are some remarkably clever things that do slip through. You have to look twice and think, is that real or is it not? And the awareness is such an important part of it.
Any other questions on the minutes from the last time? We'll move on. We're on page 25 of the agenda, budgets, inflation and corporate performance, which we never discussed last year or the year before, did we? Budgets and inflation wasn't a matter of concern to us. Who's going to lead on this, please? Angela.
Thank you, Chair. I will start, but part of this paper is Lorna will also be able to support on. I've based this paper around 3 core areas. It has tentacles across to many other areas. So if I just briefly highlight what's in the paper, and then there's plenty of time for questions. So firstly, the paper looks at the approach we're taking to budget and business planning. It is September, it is the beginning part of the process, so it is relatively early days, but we are starting work. We have been looking at the Q1 reforecast. We have been planning out the work that needs to be done in what is, will be no surprise to anybody, one of the most difficult years to budget. We've been saying that every year, I think, since COVID hit, but this year, because of the scale of challenge being presented by inflation, I think you'll be having similar conversations at your own authorities, and certainly the West Yorkshire Finance Directors are meeting regularly, sharing concerns and approaches to this. So Appendix 1 sets out our budget timeline. Our end point is always the February meeting, where the Combined Authority need to approve the budget. So between now and that February date, we need to ensure there is sufficient time for officers to gather information, collate it in a useful way. And I think that's often the challenge we have, is what is quite a complex budget is how to play that back to different audiences. But in that plan, we will be, this committee always has an interest, and I think, again, for later in the meeting to determine how and when you engage back with that budget, having got in early here, the final budget to February. So what is the wriggle room between now and then? We also involve Governance and Audit Committee. Finance Resources Committee oversees this, and the Mayor clearly takes a very high level of engagement with this. It's the big piece for this year in a very, very difficult budgeting year. The first section then gives you that budget timeline at Appendix 1. We've included also the gain share position, which I know has provoked much interest in the past, so that's a routine piece we're producing regularly. So the current position with gain share is included as Appendix 2. Reflecting the fact that we ended up with there's huge challenges on bus tendered services, which the Transport Committee and Transport Scrutiny Committee will be engaging with. But we had challenges emerging last year, more coming through this year, more coming through next year, and that's probably one of our biggest areas of pressure. We're saying this year we've probably had 3 million additional costs on bus tenders. That's only going to go upwards if we don't, if something else doesn't change. We've had government funding confirmed, emergency funding confirmed to the end of March. That is withdrawn next March, and then there is a huge task to understand how the bus market will operate after 3 years of COVID, emergency funding, changes in travel patterns, how that is going to impact on the bus market that is left, how we as the public sector engage with that. We are the Transport Authority. How do we input to that into what is a privately run set of services? How do we use public money to best effect? And it is a massive challenge for us. We clearly also have other budget pressures emerging, and we are still in the process of costing all of those up. There's a piece of work being done around our contracts more generally. So we obviously have a number of contracts in place for a variety of services and activities. Some of them will be due for renewal, and we expect the price of those to go up. Some have inbuilt RPI or CPI inflation anniversaries, and they will click in at different points over the coming year and 2 years. And Faye's, as head of commercial, her team are looking at that contract management with the operational managers who operate those contracts, and we're pulling together what that means and what the options are, how to manage that over the coming years. Energy is obviously the one that is very much at the forefront of people's minds. Our electricity costs probably aren't on the scale of some of the other local authority partners, given the activities we have, but even so, we are still looking at a not insignificant sum. We obviously need to now factor in the impact of the government announcement earlier this week to support business and ensure it does apply to public sector and what it means for us. And we are also in the process of negotiating procuring our new arrangements from next April, because we're currently in an arrangement that comes to an end next March. Salary is something that you've looked at both in the context of recruitment and retention, and Councillor Winnard has asked me lots of questions on this in the past. At the time we set the budget, we had allowed for a 2% inflation on pay, which was in line with the other local authorities. Seemed very reasonable assumption. What's happened since then, clearly, local government is offering higher figure, broadly probably 4 to 5%. We are expecting something similar, and the negotiations are still underway for that. And then there's obviously how that impacts on future years. So I think we're saying it's a difficult time. Funding going forward is unclear. We are reliant on the transport levy to fund the transport costs. The transport levy comes from our local authority partners, and they will be looking very closely. They are looking very closely at their own budgets and whether there is any opportunity to review what that transport levy is. And there's a clear tension there between the need for local authorities to balance their budgets, which is a massively difficult problem this year, but against that need that we do need a bus network that's viable in West Yorkshire, and those two are very much at odds with each other at the moment. We are looking to try to put it in the context of a 3-year strategy and a 3-year plan, and so that work is underway. The work on capital inflation we talked about at the last meeting, that is in its second round. Our Director of Delivery is leading that work with the Directors of Development at local authorities to review what we have in our project pipelines. All capital projects come with a level of risk and contingency built into them. The scale of inflation, however, is way beyond what those were. I think the most recent bid we put in was the City Region Sustainable Transport Settlement. That assumed inflation of 7 to 8%, which seemed on top of risk being built in. We're now seeing obviously inflation heading towards double-digit figures. So we already have challenges to reconcile the aspirations we want to deliver against what funding we have available. The intention is to try to get that work concluded during October, to come forward to the Finance Committee to make a decision about how we collectively look at those capital programmes. The expectation is that they end up being delivered over a longer time period, and that's a combination of affordability and deliverability. It goes back a bit to the resource issue we talked about. We need enough people to deliver the project. We need the private sector to be able to support in that. And we need the funding to deliver the project. So that work is still underway, and it's clearly proving challenging. There's projects in there that have had work put into them, that there is a commitment to, a clear need for, but we all need to cut our cloth accordingly. So that work will come forward with some decisions to be made based on the affordability, the deliverability, and strategic fit, which is particularly relevant to the Transport Fund, which was set up. It was planned probably 8-9 years ago, and since then, obviously, climate change, zero carbon, has become a much more important factor in our planning, and do we need to relook at some of our projects in that context. The final part of the paper is then our KPIs for the first quarter, which is our means of demonstrating performance of the combined authority. There's a detailed set of corporate KPIs which are updated by Lorna and her corporate performance team. They were considered at the Finance Resource Committee earlier this month, but they are here for you also to consider. We'll be adding a direction of travel arrow to them to show if they are getting better than each time they're reported. They're a quarterly report. But there's a lot of information in there around achievement of those indicators or not, and certainly some of those are at risk of not being fully achieved because things have changed. And I think that's just a reflection of the world in which we find ourselves. But happy to take questions, comments on any part of that, and we'll bring Lorna in if there's anything on the KPI or the wider business planning work underway. Thank you.
Okay, that was comprehensive. Questions, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Angela. Can I just mention about your report on page 24, I believe, 2.4, and you mentioned that India budget pressure at the moment are emerging on bus tender services are set out above with already additional £3 million up to date. So what date you refer to, and what is the next 6 months, the planned or budget additional cost is going to be for this tender service? Thank you.
Thank you. So we set the budget back in February for bus tendered services. The impact of inflation at the tail end of last financial year into this financial year leads us to the 3 million, and the combined authorities agreed a virement from the concessionary travel budget to meet that. That in effect gets us on track to the end of September. So all the contracts that have been awarded to date, the inflation that has come through on contract awards is all now affordable within that approved budget. If anything else changes between now and the end of the year, That then puts a pressure on that budget and a decision that will have to be made about whether that can be funded from somewhere else or whether it cannot go ahead. In terms of what's expected, by this point of the year, we've done the schools renewals over the summer. There was some activities by bus operators earlier in the year that we've responded to. CT Plus, which was one of our operators, which operated a number of our access bus and school services, went into administration in August, very suddenly, and we have responded to replacing those services, and that's captured in the figures to date. What we don't know is operators are perfectly at liberty to withdraw services. They give the requisite notice and the services are withdrawn. We have a few tenders that are due to expire over the next few months, and we are currently looking at whether they are extended for a few months to the end of the year to give a sort of clean starting point for next year, but that may come at a cost. But we don't anticipate any more significant changes. That's not to say bus operators won't ask for further inflationary impacts to be recognised, and we get caught in a very difficult position. Obviously, we're under contract. There is no obligation to provide any extra costs, but if they believe they're operating at a loss, needing more money, and we say we don't have more money, they may end up withdrawing the service, and we end up without the service. But we can't afford to pay extra every time somebody asks. So there's a very fine balancing act there, and the Transport Committee are looking at the bus network, the network we require, how it's going to be funded in the future, what the options are. Also how to use the bus service improvement plan funding that government awarded. So part of that has been used for the mayor's fares to reduce the cost of single journeys on bus. But there is also some funding in there to help support an enhanced network, which is quite tricky because the basic network is struggling. Enhancing something that's failing is difficult, but the team are doing their best to pull that together, and Transport Committee are very much involved in putting that together.
Thank you, Angela, for your explanation, but it doesn't ease the pain for the people in the rural area in my patch. People in the Wakefield rural area, just after 2 days ago, Arriva cut their services. 4 or 5 services has been cut. People cannot even go to school because they have to walk home at very dark time. So children don't feel very safe to go to school, teenagers, and elderly is basically isolated, completely isolated from the high street. So we understand that tender services has been set already, and the authority has set the amount of cost to the tenders. But how can they just? There is a certain covenant and term and condition. The authorities are happy. We cannot reduce the fare, bus fare, on one hand for £2, and then reduce the service completely. £2 does not mean anything to the people who don't even have the service. So we must find that. I understand you say the balance, but at this moment in time, this means that it's a lifetime, lifestyle change or threaten people's livelihood in the rural area. So I think that combined authority has to come up with some solution urgently to rectify the situation, because we, at the end of the day, has already paid for the tender service. Yeah, thank you.
I think we have to be careful that we don't wander outside our brief here. There is a group of transport scrutiny people who will be doing this job with great energy and interest, I'm sure. So I'm sure Hannah's made a note of that and it will be passed across. But I'm quite right, and we're not trying to dismiss the concerns, because it is not strictly ours. It's Jeff, and then I think, what, Paul first? No, Jeff, I saw you first. Go on.
Thank you, Angela, for the report. A couple of questions. One, I'm sorry to return to this, but you said in relation to 2.5 of the paper that salary costs are expected to exceed budget, and that the original assumption was 2%. Now, why was 2% the original assumption? Because it was clear at the time, and this is before the Ukraine war and these sort of issues, that 2% was not realistic. Now, you explained that it was the assumption taken by lots of the other local authorities, which I'm sure was the case. But I just wonder, decision? Could the authority have made another assumption, a more realistic one, or did it just choose not to do so? That's the first question. And the second question, a more general question on the capital programme. Is it likely that any projects will be actually abandoned, any planned projects abandoned, rather than just delayed or cut back?
I suggest we stick at first to the revenue things that Councillor has raised, because the budgets and things like that. And and we come back to this capital programme later, because they are two significantly different things, and we're worried about both of them. Tell us about salary costs. What percentage of the revenue costs is salary costs here?
It's difficult. The salary costs are spread across capital and other funded projects and revenue. Out of our net revenue, bear with me. I'll work the figure out while I'm answering the other part of the question, if I may. The pay assumption at 2% was above previous awards, so it actually was. Previous pay awards have been 1%, 1.5%, so 2% was actually a bit ahead, and there is always a tension between wanting to pay people appropriately but balancing that against difficult financial position. Public sector has usually had a lower pay award than the private sector. 2% didn't feel unreasonable, given at that point we were just about to conclude the last year's pay award, which was lower than that. So we felt it gave a little bit of increase. It was a combined authority decision. They could have decided a different assumption, and we recognise we will always do our best to meet the best pay offer we can, whether we need to use reserves to manage that in the short term. Unfortunately, over the long term, we don't get any extra funding for pay awards. It has to be found from the funding we've already got. So it does mean something has to give somewhere else to afford it. But I said we're on track probably for something nearer 4 to 5% like local government this year. Quite what that means next year, I don't think anyone is brave enough to predict at this stage, but we'll have to do some scenarios around that.
Yeah, I think all I was really trying to ask for is that, a realistic budget is more important than a sort of an aspirational budget, shall we say. And I think the evidence was there that salaries were likely to be rather higher this year. But thank you for the clarification.
Thanks, Chair. Sorry to drag us back to the buses, and I know it's outside our remit, but I'll just keep it very briefly. I think what we're hearing, for me, just absolutely confirms there needs to be a national re-evaluation of the whole approach to buses. It's clear that we can't keep literally fiddling about and trying to make things happen on a regional basis. This needs a national strategy. Privatisation hasn't worked. It needs to be reviewed. The franchise system clearly isn't working in that sense as well. And I absolutely agree. It's those areas, the rural areas, that are being hit the hardest, but it's also affecting other people. And it links into the cost of living crisis we're having in terms of the cost to people in terms of travel and the availability of that cheap travel. So you're right, it's outside of our remit, but sorry, Chair, I just had to make that comment.
Can I tell just we're concerned, we're not dismissing it at all. Somebody explained to us the criteria we're going to use. There was a paper went to Finance Resources, etc. A few weeks ago about the various ways we could deal with inflation on capital programmes. And one was to just reschedule and delay, and one was to scrap some of the, I don't know what the phrase was, but the less desirable ones. So where are we going with that? Are we going to scrap some of the planned capital programmes that we've got in our schedule now, or are we going to try to delay, put it off into the horizon? Jen, do you want to supplement that?
Yeah, it was to do with salaries, really, because we discussed percentages previously and how they don't really work. So talking about a realistic salary increase, I think maybe percentages may need to be looked at next year to bring the differences back together again. But on the RAG rating, the one I want to break, you've got T1, which is it's the red one that sticks out, meeting the Transforming Cities Fund annual expenditure target, and a lot of it is around consultation. How much money do we spend on consulting people every year?
Then we'll come back to how we reschedule capital projects. But that's an interesting question. Compensation.
On consultation, I can't give you a figure off the top of my head on that. All projects have an element of consultation built into them. So there are costs. We can go away and try and pull that together for you, but it's not an insignificant sum. All major projects require consultation. Sometimes it's undertaken by local authorities who are scheme sponsors, sometimes we do it. But there is always at least one stage of consultation to ensure that what we're delivering meets requirements, gives an opportunity for people to put in thoughts, objections, or support indeed, which we do sometimes get as well. But I can take that away and get somebody to pull a figure together on that.
If you would please, because the word not insignificant actually raises huge alarm bells. Consultation's absolutely great and it's essential, but when it's overdone, and can it be done differently so that more people can partake but at a cheaper cost? And so there's lots of things that are interesting around consultation. It's something we do all the time.
We'll do that. We do have a central consultation team to make sure that all our consultations are approached in the same way. We've got an online resource that we try to do most of them through, but obviously in-person consultations also needed. But I think the team would be very happy to put something together to show that they think they do it in a value for money way and as effectively as possible. But I need to bring the evidence for that, so we'll do that.
And it's great getting a report from the team who are employed to do the reports, but I think a more strategic report from somebody who employs those people to bring those reports in as to whether it's value for money might be a bit more interesting.
This isn't about buses, is it?
No, it's not a bus. Right, thank you, Chair. So just a very quick observation. We were talking about the shortage of the skilled staff here for the authority itself. And I think we need to think about the aspirational activities for the combined authority. Some of us may not voted for this, anti, but now we're all here on the round table. We need to make it work. So how are we going to make it work? We make it aspirational, entity. We have vision. Last year, you have 2% of the staff wage. I have a small travel agency. In September last year, I said to my staff, you're going to pay rise. How much? They said, I said 9%. They said, what, 9%? I said, yes, by next April, you won't thank me for 9%. If a small business of my size can actually anticipate the inflation as such, why us have to think 2% is enough for us to retain or recruit the best of the talents of our region? And we have to compare ourselves to Tees Valley. We have to think about Manchester. So we need to make sure we got aspiration, and that vision need to be coming from the leadership and building that brand name for all of us. Otherwise, it's going to fall apart. Sorry.
Okay. I think that falls into the discussion about recruitment and retention and how we get the right people, which we're going to set up a small group to look at later. But thank you. It's extremely relevant. Any other questions about revenue budgets? Because sorry, let's go on. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I know that there's obviously wanted to be the separation between revenue and capital, but they're so interlinked that the division of both of those is very, very minuscule. I mean, they're both tied together. But I just want to say, I'd love the government to give us 9% to start off with. Then we'd be able to say to ourselves, well, yes, we'll value our workforce with the 9% rather than, unfortunately, some people, fortunate for them, are getting a wage for stacking shelves in supermarkets, which are so valuable to everybody, and yet we're wanting people to produce good valued work that isn't recompensed, but I'll leave it at that. On the capital programme, I day, because obviously all local authorities are looking at their own capital programme and having to prioritise. Vision is fantastic, but vision doesn't put the pounds with it. And I do wonder what the communication level is between what the authority here is looking at. I mean, the chair mentioned the Cities Fund. What is the relationship and realignment between the combined authority and local authorities in terms of funding and how the prioritisation is going to take place? For instance, if the combined authority decides 2 or 3 of its projects have to be
Is it you again, Angela? It's pretty fundamental questions, isn't it?
That's right. There's a couple of questions there on capital if you want me to pick them all up. Do you want me to start with
Answer
Betty?
Betty first, then one back. How do we decide which capital programmes get priority?
And it's a really difficult one to resolve. I think the reason the work is taking as long as it is because it is being done in partnership with the local authorities, that it has to be a shared recommendation that, as you say, each local authority is looking at their own capital programme. Embedded within those is the bit of the combined authority funded programmes that they're delivering. So my understanding is that all local authorities are looking at in the round to understand which of their schemes they want to are able to continue with, and then how the combined authority schemes nest in with that. You're right, there is then a layer of combined authority projects that we need to make a decision about also in the same way, but my understanding is that's been played into the conversations across each local authority, so that what comes back should be a recognition of the impact of the recommendations across the whole partnership. But the proof of that will be when we bring it back to the committee to review in November.
the consultation agenda and costs. Are we smart enough now to be saying that this particular project in its infancy has had a consultation or is in a consultation process, that that's no longer going to take place, therefore the cost of that particular consultation is voided? Because otherwise we'll have somebody looking at projects that says, well, this could be that and that could be that. And then down the road somebody says, oh, hang on, that's not a priority, but we spent money, laying out money for consultants or time and management to look at that basis rather than decide that's the cut-off, we can save money by stopping that consultation now.
I think that's part of the complexity of the conversations, is looking at what stage projects have reached, what work has gone into it, how valid that work is, are the projects ready to go, or actually are they still at an early stage where costs haven't been incurred, but that's part of the conversations. So that we'll make sure that's reflected back in the decisions. So the question of what abortive costs are being incurred through this, we'll make sure that comes out.
Massive challenges, Chair.
Yes, I just clarify for me, at what level are these discussions taking place? These discussions between officers here and officers at Wakefield, Bradford, Leeds, etc. Who are you talking to? Directors or members of the executive board? Who?
My understanding is it's being led from here by our Director of Delivery, who is liaising with her equivalents at local authorities. We expect them to bring in other officers and members as needed to those conversations.
Thank you, Joe. Coming back onto the consultation point as well, I'm always struck by how we as politicians like to make consultations sound like referendum when they're not necessary. And actually, in terms of this report, from an auditing point of view, actually assessing are we doing the right level of consultation? Because where there's a project which is systemically important to the delivery of the combined authorities' plans, actually it's not really up for massive conversation. It's a refining exercise with the public, whereas some of the more optional programmes that we may wish to do probably need more actual engagement from residents because they're not as critical to the actual delivery of the combined authorities thing. So I think when we do get this report back as Councillor Dowson's and others councillors, I think we also need to look at actually what we mean by consultation, how we communicate what consultation is, that it's not a referendum, it's an engagement exercise to make sure our plans, there's nothing we've missed, and that therefore that we actually put in the appropriate level and resource. Because if we're spending huge amounts of money on something which is strategic and it's not going to change, then that's a waste of money, not value for the public purse. So it needs to be a bit more in-depth than we just spend X amount on consultation. It's what the point of consultation is for.
Do we want to get somebody to come and speak to us for 10 minutes about the impact that consultation has at some future meeting? We'll think about that. Yeah, there's consultation. 20% of people against everything at every occasion. You always get opposition. Explain to us how some of these projects are abandoned now. As a result of these discussions with local authority senior management, some must presumably have been pushed over the horizon, so we stop work on them. What are those? Who ultimately makes that decision that we're going to scrap this project?
That will be a member decision. It will come back to where, at the moment, we're intending it to come back to Finance Resource Committee or Combined Authority to make those decisions. At the moment, I can't say whether there are projects that are intended to be abandoned. I think the intention is ideally that they stay on a pipeline. If they are still valid projects, if they still meet the requirement, if they're still needed, then they end up further down the list. It's the prioritisation of the projects we've got. We've struggled in the past with not having projects available ready to deliver. When government announces a specific funding pot, you know, we want projects ready to hit the ground running in 3 months' time that hit these criteria. Potentially some of these projects could be sat there waiting and suddenly there is more funding that it ticks a box for another round of funding. So it's not necessarily a bad thing to have projects ready and waiting. So I don't think that this isn't setting out to abandon projects, it's setting out to prioritise, get deliverability at the forefront of it, and over time, who knows? I think it's not a one-off task. The team do regularly review programmes, and I think, you know, one of the comments before about the Transforming Cities Fund and the red risk on that is continually being reviewed to understand why is it not delivering against the timescales, what can be done to bring it back on track. So the piece of work here is something almost spanning all of that work underway and pulling it all together into one place. But projects do get regularly monitored. Projects within programmes are monitored, reported back on and reviewed, and there have been tactical changes through the life of both the West Yorkshire Plus Transport Fund, I think Transforming Cities as well, the LIPTIP, the Leeds Public Transport Improvement Programme, came back with some tactical changes where there was a recognition that something different might now work against what was originally approved. So it's not a new process. The scale of it this time is probably a bit unusual.
HS2 to Yorkshire isn't being abandoned, it's been postponed till the next century, isn't it?
It's all right. I was so amused by that, I've forgotten what I was going to say, to be quite honest. So you come in first and I'll think about it.
Thank you, Chair. Just want to know that the Chancellor today just announced about the deregulations and the planning, relaxation itself. So, Andrea, do you foresee that's going to cause more complications, or they will be actually helping us to deliver some more capital projects? I mean, it's quite new, but certainly something's coming. I think, are you aware of this announcement? Of course you are.
We've had a very brief conversation this morning about it. I think I reserve the right for us to go away and look at it properly. Come back to you. Say it's very hot off the press, and we have a team currently crawling through the detail to understand how we may or may not.
That sounds reasonable, doesn't it? If it's only been announced an hour ago, we can't expect it.
Yes, but it's a good process.
No, that's okay. I've remembered now. It's my age, honestly, and it's all to do with companies that we employ to deliver services. Because I agree with Paul. The minute we put profit into what is basically a service, then it's quite an interesting way of providing all the extra things we need around the green economy and so on, and energy. Do we ever, so the question is, do we ever monitor, probably isn't with the economy as it is a good time to ask, but have we ever monitored the level of profit that businesses are making at all? I think I'll just leave it at there for now.
I'm being very reflective on that one. That's a very difficult one for us to do. I mean, the process by which we procure companies to provide services for us is designed to drive best value from that. Whether clearly they will make some profit from it or they wouldn't do it. A lot of what we provide is provided by the public sector, but we do have a very mature procurement process that hopefully gets the best value out of the contracts that we do have to let.
Just by way of supplementary, because the reverse side of that is if we don't monitor the business effectiveness of the companies we employ, we end up with our access buses not coming to pick our elderly up because they've gone out of business. So this is a two-edged sword, and very much so I would like to take all bus services back into public control. You know, at the moment in the real world, you know, we have to make sure we're getting the best value for the money we've got, which is a reducing resource. If you're having too much profit or you're having no profit at all, and we're at risk of losing services, especially rural services where you've got one bus a day or people wanting to go to hospital access buses, it is something potentially, without increasing the workload too much of somebody within the organisation, we need to make sure that the businesses we employ are actually effective.
If I can come back on that, I'm debating whether it's fair to step in at this point, but we do monitor some of our key suppliers from a range of perspectives about their viability, because there is reliance on certain suppliers. So there is some work goes on, not necessarily just about profit, but about how the company's performing. We obviously have contract management arrangements in place to ensure that they're delivering the contract requirements as well. But you've got the two parts of that. Are they delivering what we asked them to do? And in the background, is the company functioning? Is it likely to be there next year to continue providing that? So Faye and team do work with managers to try and ensure that. But it's very difficult to keep ahead of that information, because obviously a lot of information out there is backward-looking, information that's been filed, information that's in the public domain. So I think it's an area of challenge, but the team do their best with it.
I have a speech on bankers' bonuses now, if you're not careful. The lifting the limit on bankers' bonuses. Honestly. Jeff, go on.
Angela, the impact of inflation on gain share, bearing in mind that gain share, as far as I understand it, is not index linked. So £38 million a year for, you know, the foreseeable future. How is that being played out, and is that likely to have an impact on some of the plans which the authority had for gain share? And secondly, linked to the gain share issues, is some of the gain share monies, are they actually being wired, or can they be wired to support you know, shortfalls in either revenue or capital budgets, which the authority is already having to deal with?
Gain share. So
Page 33 is gain share, and we have to talk about that because it is substantial. So sometimes, can you explain that page 33 to us, because I don't understand it. But the principle of can you hire things is a good question as well, yes. Page 33, 187 million spent on one sheet of paper.
So I'll start with the basics of it. So our gain share is not index linked. You're absolutely right. It's a fixed sum across the duration. So the final year is worth much, much less than it looks on paper. That's in common with all the other gain share arrangements. So I think there is an acknowledgement that the buying power is greater if we use it now. Because of that, we had anticipated that in the early years there'd be a mix of using it to fund revenue type activities, where it was cash, using that cash to fund revenue projects, and that some of it would be used to support borrowing. And work is underway on a number of pipelines of projects against each investment priority, which should in turn deliver us a pipeline of projects, and that will allow us to build up a capital programme, and we can recommend then that we use some of the gain share for borrowing, which means we'd probably get more of the value up front, because I think in 20 years' time, whoever is sat around the table looking at this spreadsheet will probably have bigger numbers to think about somewhere else, because these will be fairly insignificant in real terms by that point. The gain share was given to us as part of the Mayoral Devolution deal. It is subject to reviews, gateway reviews by government to ensure we are using it to encourage growth in the region, and it is not expected to be used to fund gaps and shortfalls in normal budgets, either by us or our partners. Clearly, there is a tension between how do we keep all our services going and then add into it when the funding to deliver those basic services is not there. So there are probably some areas where funding falls away. We're looking at, again, Share could put in place a different programme that might actually suit the region better, because a lot of our funding programmes are very narrow. They have to act in a certain way. We have been told to spend the money to achieve certain objectives, and the gain share gives us more freedom. So it won't be a like-for-like replacement, but there is an opportunity to hopefully bring the gain share in, say on skills or employment activities, but we can design the programmes that we want to make a difference in the region. But no, we will not be firing it to fill revenue gaps anywhere. If I just turn to page 33, so the Combined Authority has approved the investment priority areas, and in order to, from a standing start of gain share, there had to be some way of making sense of it and chunking it down into something manageable. So the initial work that was undertaken as the Mayor arrived was to agree the investment priorities. So there are 6 investment priorities set out on page 33, and there was an indicative amount of gain share applied in order to focus resource in the right sort of way, because neither us nor our partners have got lots of people sitting around working up schemes and interventions, but it hopefully reflected the relative availability of funding in other areas for it. So transport was down for a little less in some areas other than where it was supporting transforming cities, because there was lots of other money for transport, but some of the other areas like climate emergency gained from this, because we have no other funding coming through from government or anywhere else for climate projects. So the indicative funding was then to help shape the initial scale of a response to it from us and our partners. The first 4 years worth of gain share adds up to nearer 150 million. It was over-programmed because all programmes, projects have some slippage, some changes over the course of their development. So it's over-programmed against the first 4 years available funding. What has then been happening is different projects have been approved. So if you look at IP1, Good Jobs and Resilient Businesses, for example, the bottom 4 lines of there are specific projects that have been fully approved through the Combined Authority. So there's a business productivity programme, there's a local business programme being developed, there's the entrepreneurship programme. They've all had formal approved funding and are out to delivery. The pipeline project line, the 5.5 that's highlighted in bold in the final column on the right, is the money that is still being worked up in terms of a pipeline of projects. And they, in turn, will come through for approval. They'll get added to the bottom of that list, and the pipeline figure will decrease. So the figures in bold for each of the investment priorities down the right-hand side are the amounts that are due to be approved out across individual projects. Some of those are due to come forward quite soon. There's some coming to the Combined Authority in October and another swathe in December. So from a sort of standing start, starting to build up into delivery programmes. And some of those delivery programmes, if they're capital, then that may take us to the point of starting to put together a borrowing programme. And we will also, over the coming budget process, start to look at, that's the first 4 years of gain share, but then there's the rest of it. So do we start knowing what we now know, knowing what issues face us, what priorities are, going back to business planning? Do we then start to allocate further years of gain share into those indicative allocations? And we need to bring that through to the Combined Authority to consider. Does that help?
Well, I understand Bridge 33 a little better now, really, because I understand the reasons for over-budgeting, over-planning. That makes sense, yes. But there's some enormous figures around here, and you sometimes wonder how you can be so. Sometimes they're too precise. Sometimes the numbers are too wide. Pipeline project, 3.5 million a year starting next year. I mean, it looks a round figure that nobody's really analysed. We've got 187 million spent there, but there's only 130 something, 140 something available from gain share so far, isn't there? Do we get it? Do we get it all now? We can spend it as we want, or do we just get a cheque for 38 million every year, or what?
We get an annual amount of gain share. We are working on the basis that we will meet all government requirements and that the 38 million will come in each year. There is technically a risk that at the end of each 5 year period, when there's a government review, they could turn around and say, you're not spending it properly. But we can't operate like that. If we work in 5 year tranches, then we'll never get the later years spent. And as we've already established, the sooner we get these programmes out to delivery, the sooner both we make a difference in the region, and secondly, we get the maximum buying power from the funding we've got. So the 4 years was simply a means to get into the problem of the question of how do you spend £38 million a year for the next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. So I think we'll move into doing the next phase of that as the teams are now working through these projects. So the climate change wave 1 is, I believe, coming forward very soon. That may well be on a bigger scale than the funding here. There'll be a decision then, do we put more into climate, because they're all priorities. They're difficult to rank. They're not in a particular order. But depending where the Combined Authority want to go, we may want to put more money into climate emergency, may want to put more into culture, maybe more on skills. That's a choice to be made.
Thank you, Paul first, but then after that, explain to you how we use this gain share funding to lever in capital expenditure by borrowing. So you Paul first.
Thanks. Might touch that actually because there's 37 million. I love the term over programming. Is that correct? Is that the term? I like that's a new term. I'll have to take that back to Kirklees. We're over programming. Something useful for council discussions. That's huge in terms of the money we go in. That as Peter said, that's actually in there in terms of the difference. So, is this about your indication that in the future that you'll be using future gain share to fund some of this deficit, if you like, or this over programming, or is this linked into the issue of borrowing? It's when you look at these numbers, particularly in the current climate, you say, whoa, hang on a minute, where are we going? So understand the ideas, but I'm just trying to get that rationale around why we put that in there without sort of an indication of how that gap's going to be filled.
So over programming is a technique I think most of us have done over the years, because if you set out to in round figures, if we tried to put a programme together for £50 million, it may well fall short or something drops out, and you get to the end of it and think, oh, we've actually only spent 43 million and we've wasted the opportunity for 7 million. So this is putting a larger figure in was hoping to then maximise and get all the money spent. If indeed all of these come back, and they're very precise figures in some instances, if they all come back and there are viable schemes to take forward in the 4 years, then there will be a choice to be made about whether subsequent years gain shares brought forward to fund them, or whether some of them have to wait and are done in the future. It's impossible to be precise. This is one pot of funding along with all the other pots of funding. But you're right, if everybody came back, something that added up to 187 million, then we'd need to start eating into years 5 and 6. But in fairness, these are going to start being delivered in years 5 and 6 anyway. Some of the pipelines are likely to be projects that have 2 or 3 years to be delivered. So that hopefully will come out in wash a little as the detail comes through.
But that's what I thought, but that's not clear, and I think it needs to be communicated, because if somebody looked at these numbers, they go, whoa, these people are out of control. Yeah, so it just needs to be clarified.
We can do that, and we are monitoring the approvals which have not, the approvals for projects do not exceed the funding that we have got to make them happen.
I think we understand, but we're not necessarily reassured, are we?
Thank you, Chair. Angela, just wonder, under IP6, are you aware of any culture and creative project for Wakefield at the moment?
I'd have to check, apology. I don't have that information in my head at the moment, sorry.
These projects on this page here, what inflation cost was built in when these figures were brought forward? Because obviously to deliver now is going to cost more. And it comes back to Paul's point in terms of the balance of the cost in between that you're hoping will come out in the wash. But that wash actually still contains an inflation level that when these projects were started didn't have the cost implications they have now, Angela. So that's, excuse me, so that's got to come out in the wash as well. So we could be talking more than the 30 odd million when you build in the extra inflation.
So the projects that have been specifically approved have taken into account risk and inflation at the point they were approved. Most of them have been approved within the last year, and that is a fixed sum. They know they cannot come back for more. So if inflation is a problem within those individually approved projects, then they will have to manage that. They shouldn't, most of these are contracted, and they should be manageable within the funding agreed. In terms of the initial indicative allocations given to each of these work streams, the teams collectively across the partnership are looking to bring forward a pipeline of projects that sort of adds back to that figure. The reality is that they will deliver less now than they would have done had we been having this conversation 2 years ago. So I think the reality is the pipeline will be smaller to take into account inflation, because the project they're now delivering, they're now specifying and putting together will be taking into account what we now know about inflation and pay costs.
I have some questions on borrowing and the accessibility of the gain share fund for all strange purposes. But we'll leave those for another day, because we've got only half an hour left, and we've got to make progress in social values. Are there any other questions that we've not, subjects we've not raised on the whole
Chair?
Inflationary pressure?
I'm just wondering what approach the authority was taking to use of reserves to prop up some of the projects, or indeed possibly even some revenue issues which the challenges were facing.
Our reserves are very, very small. There is a very limited amount of scope to use reserves. They might assist in short-term responses, but use of reserves is not a sustainable position. So we'll be bringing that forward to Finance Resources Committee. Our general reserve is, I think, 11 million, which we can release an amount of that, but it's still not a lot, particularly against the volatility of the bus network. We have some specific reserves for capital accounting purposes that everyone has that we can't touch. And we did set up a 2 million transport reserve from some of the excess savings we made on concessionary travel last year. So that's in play to play into the transport challenges. We also have a reserve for the transport fund borrowing that is due to kick in shortly. The transport fund required local contribution. We've spent much of the government money. We now have to make our local contribution happen, and that will be funded through a borrowing programme. But we'll clearly come back to borrowing in a future meeting.
I mean, it's reassuring. I would be worried if the authority is planning to use reserves, particularly on to prop up their revenue budgets. I think that would be a very dangerous thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I ask that gain share schedule, which is page 33 this time, it is on just with the papers, not necessarily for decision at each meeting, please. It looks to be so substantial that I'd like to keep an eye on it, if nothing else. And an updated one, not the same one. Hannah, can you just summarise one or two of the headlines of what we've agreed this last half hour? Because it'll be an
I think so. The main one and action arising from this is that the consultations element, that we'd like a strategic report on consultations, particularly detailing if it's value for money, BFM, and potentially somebody to come and speak to us on that matter.
That is important, yes. There are other things out there, but I think that's, I'll pick that one up, yes, please. And again, share schedule. We could spend the rest of the day on agenda item 7 and go through all the KPIs, but we're not going to. We're going to move to item 8, which is the...
Chair, just quickly before we move on.
Yeah.
Do we feel like we've covered the capital side of this? Because we sort of skirted in and out of it.
Well,
I just wonder whether we feel we've covered that entirely today.
is that a thought thing we could perhaps raise with the mayor next time, merge the two things and get her view on it? I take your point there, it's an enormous subject, colossal figures, and mustn't let it get lost in the revenue budgets. Thank you, we'll do that. We move on to agenda item 8 on page 53, please. Is somebody going to talk us through this, or is somebody going to the headlines, or over to you?
So I presented to this committee previously about improving the visibility of social value achieved through procurement activities at the CA. We propose to do this through the adoption of the TOMS framework, the Themes, Outputs and Measures framework, and using that framework via the social value portal. So since then we have been trialling the system and the TOMS, and we've now completed 7 procurements through that trial of various sizes. There have been some teething issues to be resolved. In particular, we need to ensure that we remain easy to do business with, and we don't overcomplicate the process, and also that this doesn't slow the process down. However, in terms of the main focus of the trial, we can now report that we've achieved commitment to just over £435,000 worth of social value from those contracts. And that equates to an average of approximately 24% of the contract values. So some of the kinds of social value that we've achieved include hiring local people to deliver the contract, expert business advice to VCSEs and MSMEs, committed supply chain spend within West Yorkshire, equality and diversity training for staff and supply chain staff, commitment to pay the real living wage, community days, sessions for young people to improve job hunting skills, provide mentoring, CV advice, that kind of thing, and school and college visits. Overall, our suppliers are responding really well to the social value ask. I think that they recognise that this is a way for them to differentiate themselves and also recognise the softer benefits of being able to win the public's hearts and minds, particularly around certain projects. So from our point of view, it enables us to maximise the benefits returned for the set amount of money that we are spending. But just the fact that we can easily report on the social value and the benefits we can achieve, I think is a huge step forward. So next steps are to review the process, the documentation, etc., ensure that it is accessible, succinct and straightforward as possible. We have a new account manager at Social Value Portal, and we're in the process of reviewing the SLA with them and our terms. We also need to review the TOMs. I think it was mentioned at the previous scrutiny committee about making sure that we've got real focus in the TOMs, and we have recognised that our list is too long, so we will be looking to reduce that further and really focusing on those key things. But we are going to continue to apply the TOMs to all our procurements and use the Social Value Portal for everything over £50,000. And most important, we are going to use the Social Value Portal to monitor contract delivery. So we've got the commitment, but we now need to make sure that it is actually delivered through the life of the contract. And we will be reviewing progress in 6 months' time. Thank you.
Sorry, could you just talk me through Appendix 1 for agenda item 8, because I don't quite understand what all these figures mean. The SV commitment, is that their commitment to us or our commitment to them? And there's two in particular that I'm really interested in. One is how we get social value out of the Wyker brand review. So that'd be quite interesting, please.
Yes, so it is their social value commitment they make to us as part of the contract.
Thomas Brann, Thompson Brann, who I've never heard of, they're working for us, so they're one of our suppliers on our brand review, and they've guaranteed to spend 35,000, is it, or are we talking more than that? Which is 44.43% of the contract is a social value return.
Yeah, it's the social value. The actual pounds and pence figures is worked out by using the TOMs. I have brought some examples with me if you wanted to have a look. It's not that particular contract.
And the other thing, just because you're going to send that round, that's quite interesting. So they're delivering equality and diversity training, which they should be doing anyway. But our benefit from them doing that is we can write it in as part of our delivery of the targets that we're setting.
Yeah, so we're asking them to deliver additional things on the back of receiving this contract.
So things that they should, but surely they should be delivering equality and diversity training as part of their business, not as an extra. So we're actually, in effect, it's double bubble, isn't it? Sorry, that probably isn't a very technical term.
That should be taken out as part of the evaluation of what they're offering, but I will double check on that. But it is supposed to be things that they're offering in addition, just because they're getting this contract. So it should be additional things.
So how do we know that they're not also claiming this against 28 other contracts they've got with different organisations?
So that's part of the evaluation that Social Value Portal do, and they monitor that as well as we go through the contract. So they are trying to remove some of that. It is just related to our contract. So everybody is using the Social Value Portal as well, so they can map it across different contracts with different organisations and provide some check and challenge.
That's good, because I would hope this was extra on top of what they should be doing and not as part of what they, you know what I'm saying?
Yes, yeah, I do, yeah.
Just clear my mind as well. We're not paying this extra money, are we? They're asserting that they're spending this money in this direction.
Emotional.
Yeah. It's not costing us this, is it?
No, and it's not real pounds and pence either in essence, is it? Because it isn't the amount they're going to spend. This is the value that we're placing on what it is they're offering to do. And that value comes from the TOMS framework.
Another,
Thanks. Yeah. Thanks for this. I'm interested to see the progress you're making. And take the points. It is difficult, isn't it? Particularly when they're notional, when there are things around volunteering. One of the things that we've just passed the social value policy at Kirklees, and one of the things that we are looking at and progressing with one of our major contracts is setting up a fund. So a fund that would work with the voluntary sector, and that would be real money in that sense. So that would be an actual contribution from the suppliers, from our partners, into that fund, which would then be managed with our third sector partners, alongside many of the things you were talking about as well. But I'd just throw that in because I think the great difficulty with social value is that measurement and that understanding of the point, is this in addition? And that's certainly one of the avenues we're looking at. And we're doing this exactly the same as you said. We've tried our very best to focus down our key aims within the social value policy to a small number of elements that recognise our overall vision and our strategy as a council as well. But yeah, the more I think we can do, and you could do to actually, in addition to these, which are absolutely beneficial, these additional benefits, is to look at perhaps the possibility of establishing a fund, which would therefore they would contribute into a fund, and that can then be used within communities and with in particular with the voluntary sector.
I think that's a good point. We haven't costed out the entire cost of managing this. There is a fee for paying for the social value portal, but we haven't looked at our costs internally as a team, for example, around managing it. We could work that out if required.
Well, I think that's where you actually look at pounds, shillings and pence and value. Because when you're looking at budgets so tight as they are,
That's what we're here for. You've got a note of that. What Betty would like you to produce some sort of paper on the costs and benefits of this exercise. Please, is that
I think
clear?
we can do that, and then I think as Faye said before, the portal does lots of the management on our behalf, and should eradicate that duplication. It's the social value portal where all of this is this is all managed through. So the suppliers are feeding
Are they in this
into
building?
that. No, that's a separate organisation.
Separate organisation.
So that I think we can do the cost analysis against the scale of what we've got here. Our management costs should be a very, very small part of a very small figure compared to we've got 400,000 plus of benefit from only a few contracts.
Notional, I mean,
yes, indeed, it is notional.
We've got to get
yes.
this right, Chair. It's a notional benefit.
It is.
And I want to just say this as well.
Thank you, Betty.
Just coming on to the point of the poll. It sounds like a bit of marking your own homework. I've said how much I've done, and isn't this great? So what is the actual auditing process in terms of it's not marking your homework to say I've done a great job? And second, I think as Councillor Dowson has said, some of these things they probably should be doing anyway, and we shouldn't be procuring these companies if they weren't doing it anyway. So why are they adding? I've done community engagement X, Y, and Z. Well, actually, that's some basic things. Did you do? I'm a good employer because I've done diversity training. Well, they should be doing that as part of their corporate responsibility internally anyway. So I'm really concerned that where there's a bit of patting on the back, as it were, of the people doing their own homework and actually basically claiming value, monetary value for something that actually ought to be doing and actually isn't adding any real additional value above and beyond the contract that they've agreed with the authority.
Thank you, I agree with every word.
Thanks. There were two points I wanted to make. One, to sort of arise that I do absolutely agree would be appropriate to have a value so we can see, if you like, the multiplier of what the nominal social value of this is. By the point that Councillor Ray is making, I think you're right. So a lot of these companies should be doing this, but to a certain extent, is not the point of the exercise to ensure that we are giving contracts to companies who are doing this perhaps better or as well as they should, and not, if you like, cutting corners. So, which may again limit the multiplier of the amount of effort we're putting into it and the amount of benefit we get. But it's a figure if we don't have that actual cost of what we're putting into it to start off with, we can't say whether it's very good or poor. The main one I wanted to raise, looking at this this very helpful this sort of example thing you've sent around. Obviously, there's a significant target social, local, and economic value figure for this, but skimming down it, there are a lot of the lines in this which have got zero written by them at the moment, and given that these contracts are let at least in part on the basis of what is alleged to be forthcoming in terms of social value from the contracts, then to what extent, and I think you did talk about the portal monitoring, so to what extent are we in a position to be able to do anything about it if somebody says, yes, we're going to give you lots of social value, we give them a contract, at least in part on the basis of what that is. And then when they get to the end of the contract, there's a whole load of notes down there, and it hasn't quite worked out like that, and we can't ungive the contract at this point. How is it monitored? How is it? How is that encouraged? Because again, if on average half of the social value that is alleged doesn't actually come out at the end of it, again it goes to the value we're getting for our input over the period of the contracts.
Sorry, Chair, can I ask that it's actually sent to us, because there's not enough copies. Councillor Ray and I haven't got a copy of this forwarding for my colleague. Because I find it really...
Me too. Yeah, not seen this before. I think you maybe get. Sorry, Jeff. Do you want to speak first?
Yeah. I suppose where I'm coming from is there's a cost of all of this. Obviously, there's a cost on the authority, but there's also actually a cost on the businesses who are providing the services. And it might be that the consequence of this is there's a lot of social value, but actually the West Yorkshire Authority is paying more money to get it. And you know, where is the balance? It might be that some of the businesses who we contract with, as a consequence of meeting all of these laudable criteria, actually may be less productive than they would be, may be more expensive than they would be, may not be employing as many people as they would be, because they're trying to tick all of these various boxes. So I suppose my only point is that there is a cost on both sides of this sort of approach. And as Councillor Rhodes said more generally, clearly in a situation where cost matters, I just think we need to be aware of and have some sort of understanding of the potential costs on all sides and what the overall economic impact is for all parties concerned.
Sorry, I've just got these, but we've been looking around down them between us and are quite aghast because some of these statutory anyway. And surely we shouldn't be giving contracts to people who don't have these in place, let alone giving them social capital value on a contract for doing them in excess of what they should be doing anyway. It's blowing my mind at the moment. Sorry.
I think you gathered there's a bit of scepticism about this paper, and we'd perhaps like to come back to it. We'll prepare a series of questions for you, please. And if you could then just do a written report for the next meeting, we don't want to take any of your time. But there is a reason for a little bit more detail, a little bit more depth, I think, really. So we'll come back to next time, but briefly, you'll carry our concerns back to whoever needs to hear them. Thank you. Right, we now go to the work programme. The one thing about the work programme is that the Mayor's coming next time. I just identified 2 minutes ago, we'd like her to speak about how projects are postponed or abandoned or diluted. So that's one thing. But if there's any other stuff people want to talk, people want to interrogate the Mayor about, please, through Hannah, let us know. We'll
Chair,
to be fair to her, we'll tell her we're going to.
Yeah. Chair, can I just say, I think it's important that we use the opportunity with the Mayor to concentrate on the particular issues which are pertinent to the corporate scrutiny committee, because I think there's a tendency, for understandable reasons, that when the Mayor is, we start getting into all the other parts of the agenda, interesting though they are. I think we've got to remember that we're a corporate scrutiny committee, and we need to try and make sure that on all these issues within our purview, we get answers from the Mayor on those subjects. Tempting though it is to go into other areas.
I don't think the Mayor would try to divert our attention from important matters to it. No.
Chair, can I just be offended one more time? I understand that we want to focus on this committee's task, core task. But however, look at the RAC rating of the bus service and all that. We need to think about that is really a most important part of delivery of the Mayor's duty to the compliant authority. So we can't not to. It's overlap. It's unavoidable. As I say, extra funding may have to be given because of the dire situation status we are in. So I don't believe that that should be completely out of the agenda. To be honest with you.
I think we agreed about an hour ago to set up a working group to look into workforce retention and recruitment, which Councillor Winard volunteered to chair. Do you remember that? But if we get 2 or 3 people to step forward, and it's on the agenda for January anyway, but if you lead some sort of working group, a working group to with a paper to that meeting, please.
Well, if I could suggest that Hannah and the team will set up some sort of date in the near future, where we can scope out the issues. And a lot of the issues have already been, raised in this meeting, and I think that Angela and her team understand the issues of concern on workforce. But I think we want more in-depth briefing and a meeting to discuss those.
That is our prime business, isn't it? This is what we're here to talk about. You're not fair. I just told him he volunteered. He didn't know that.
I'm open to.
Whatever you say.
I'm open to persuasion. One way I don't mind one way or the other. It's whatever we think would work best.
Chair, would it be possible?
Can we take 9 o'clock on the meeting? Or perhaps 10 as the same in the day in November when we're meeting the mayor.
Unless it's online, in which case we can do it anytime, anywhere, evening.
Consult with Hannah and we'll sort something out.
I believe it's 10 o'clock.
Scoping meeting as a Teams meeting.
Yes.
But hopefully we'll commission a paper which covers some of the main things, and then we can decide whether or not there's any further meetings off the main agenda. Let's do that.
Good idea.
Only laughing, Chair, because we've just been talking about rural bus services. No way I could get in for that time.
Oh yes, you want this broadcasting, don't you? So what I was saying was, thanks to Hannah for all she's done since Khaled was off work, and how professional it's been, and how very satisfied with what you're doing. And you'll perhaps take that back, Angela, to wherever that needs going. It's been seamless. Thank you. Good morning. End of meeting.